Mommy Mo is in Adire, also repping Africa. We are looking at building family legacy as an African. And before we go into the questions I have for her, I'm going to read her profile. It is worth reading. So just go with me. Modupe Ehirim is the founder of and the lead counselor at the Right Fit Marriage Academy. Works with men and women to become persons that their spouses look forward to coming home to. Using the Right Fit Marriage program, Modupe Ehirim guides young professionals to intentionally design and build healthy and long-lasting marriages. She is a certified Symbis Save Your Marriage Before It Starts facilitator. The Symbis assessment gives you a personalized roadmap to making your marriage everything it is meant to be. She is a certified family systems engineering practitioner. The network of FSC practitioners comprises of professionals who work to restore dignity to human relationships in marriage, parenting, and family life. Modupe has varied experiences. She graduated with a first-class honors in chemical engineering from University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, in 1980. Some of us were still sucking breast then. She then worked with the Central Bank of Nigeria, building and engineering services for 17 years before setting up a specialty retail bookstore business, which she operated for 13 years. She has served on the national executive committees of two business membership organizations, Christian Booksellers Association of Nigeria and NECA, Network of Entrepreneurial Women, NEW. She is currently a member of the board of OASIS International, publishers of Africa Study Bible, and chair board of Africa Speaks 2018 Trust. Modupe is an avid reader, that is passionate about relationships and marriages. She mentors young people, I'm one of them, helping them to chart their life's path. She teaches on marriage topics daily on the Right Fit Marriage Academy, a Facebook community that currently has over 19,000 members. She is also the counselor on the popular weekly relationship and marriage show, Mama's Corner, on Wazobia 95.1 FM radio. She is the author of Marriage is Not a Trap and 30 Reasons Why Couple Quarrel About Money. She is of Yoruba origin. She is happily married to Boniface, a husband of over 37 years, who is of Igbo origin. Together, they have 4 lovely children. Thank you so much, Ma, for availing us this beautiful bio of yours. And we're so glad to have you on in House of Saviors. We know you're coming from time to time, but having you on the seat today, delights our hearts. God bless you. I think we'll just, you're welcome. Please, let's just welcome Mommy Mo in the group chat. Let's it start buzzing. Let her feel welcome. Let her feel at home again and again and again and again. Thank you so much, Ma, for coming. I'll go straight into my questions that I have curated for you. The first one is, what was growing up like for you, and how did your family heritage shape your values?
Okay. Thank you very much again, everyone, for having me, and thank you for being a part of House of Saviors. And then thank you as well for coming today. What was childhood like for me? Both my parents are from the same town, but interestingly, I had an upbringing that was more like that of an English family. And here is what happened. My father's parents died before he was 10, and my dad had to figure out life by himself. And then when he married my mother, both of them moved to Lagos. And so they also were very far away from the relatives of my mother. And so I grew up just knowing my father, my mother, and my siblings. That's why I say we were more like an English family. But then, with the benefit of hindsight now, I see that my parents were pretty intentional people in the way that they nurtured us. Education was very important for them. I'm actually the first person to go to university in my entire family on both sides. But my parents quickly recognized that education was important. And so if there is anything they sacrificed for, it was that we should all go to school. But my father, as I said, was a very intentional person. And I'll just give this illustration to show you how intentional they were. So when I finished secondary school and all of my mates were going abroad, and I spoke to my parents about going abroad, then my father said, that's a very nice idea that you have brought. However, if I send you abroad, I would not have money to educate your siblings. And so I would prefer that you stay in Nigeria so that I can spread my money and ensure that you all are educated. But I promise you that all of you will go abroad to do a master's program. And he did it. So we all did our first degrees in Nigeria, but we all went abroad for our master's degree paid for by my dad. And that's how very intentional my parents were. So intentionality would probably be a word that you would use to describe my upbringing.
Wow, that was quite thoughtful of them, ensuring that everybody went to school and having conversations with you in such a way that you could understand. Because we know that there are some parents that will just say, you're not going, and that's it. They won't give you the reason why you're not going, and you're just left, to figure that all out by yourself. I'll say thanks to them. Thanks to them for doing this for you. Okay, so my next question is, from your bio and from relating with you, we know that you are in an intertribal marriage. So we would like you to tell us how people in such marriages can create a legacy, especially when both couples, are from different tribes. When we have intertribal marriages, how can the couples in such marriages create a legacy that, lasts?
I think what couples who are in intertribal marriages have to do in today's world is no different from what everyone else has to do. And perhaps I should share with our audience this particular thing which many people do not pay attention to. If you wanted to get married some 50, 60, 80, 100 years ago, you were marrying someone who you know. Why? You probably grew up in a village where your partner grew up, so your parents knew one another, your grandparents knew one another, maybe your great-grandparents even knew one another. You had typically the same communal values and so on and so forth. And so legacy was very easy to pass on. You didn't need to do much work because the community had processes that enabled the legacy of the community to be passed on. At the time I got married, it was still that way. So being in an intertribal marriage is then slightly different because it's obvious that both of you are coming from different places. So for an intertribal couple, I think the first thing they have to do is build a shared identity. And I'll share a personal story to illustrate that. So when myself and my husband were thinking of our family, we had to ask ourselves, if an Igbo man is wanting to marry a Yoruba woman, what kind of a family do they want to build? Most people never give thought to that because Yoruba culture is not exactly the same as Igbo culture. And so what most people will just think is, none of us should lose our identity, but they don't take practical steps towards it. My husband and I actually sat down and said, are we building an Igbo family? Are we building an Igbo family that has Yoruba sprinkling in it, and all of those things? And eventually we decided that we were going to build an Igbo family. So it was a consciously thought of decision that we were going to build an Igbo family. We weren't in a situation where I was going to lose my identity. We just looked at the community that we were living in, which is Nigeria. And we knew that tribes were pretty important. And we knew that if you were not clearly identified as one of a particular ethnic group, it could create problems for you. So we looked and we said, if we're going to bring children up in this situation, what should happen? The decision to build an Igbo family for us meant in our home, we ate Igbo food, we ate Igbo snacks, we did things the Igbo way so that our children were growing up conscious of which community they were a part of. What is interesting is that my first daughter, for example, her favorite meal is amala and ewedu. She didn't learn that from me because I've never cooked it in my home. But because she had Yoruba grandparents, of course, when we went to visit my parents, so that's what I mean by shared identity. When we got married, we understood that we were coming to a unique relationship and we were coming from different places. Nothing was wrong with where we were coming from, but we needed to create an identity that both of us shared in common, which respected where we were coming from. So I became an ambassador for my people, to my husband, to help him to understand how he should relate with them. And he became an ambassador for me to help me to understand. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you then need to pass on cultural knowledge. So even though I'm not an Igbo woman, for example, I educated myself a lot, to find out why is this done this way? The thing that the typical Igbo person would just accept. I didn't have the history, so I wouldn't know. Even when I joined my husband in the Anglican church, I didn't just follow him there. I remember asking my vicar, what makes a person an Anglican? And he told me to go and read the Book of Common Prayer. And I went through all of it and asked questions and then decided that, okay, I did want to become an Anglican. So these were the kind of things. And for my husband, it was exactly the same because there's a lot of stuff that Yoruba people do. And he needed to understand that insofar as your in-laws are Yorubas, you needed to know how to relate with them and do things in a way that respected their own perspective of life. Let me not tell you what happened when I had a baby. And Yoruba people have babies, do naming ceremony on the 7th day, and Igbo people do not do that. And my child was the first grandchild on both sides for my parents. We had to use a lot of wisdom to manage that. And then the third thing is that you have to consciously create new traditions. Sometimes the old traditions are okay. So in Igbo culture, for example, it's normal for everybody to go home at Christmas time. What happens when everybody is now living on different continents? You have to look and say, why do they have those? Why do they go home at Christmas time? What is the intent? And then you would now look at what you have now and build it. So those are three things, One, we understood that we were culturally different. And that didn't mean bad or good. It just was ease. And we had to do all of those things. Of course, to do that, it meant that we had to communicate, learn how to help one another to understand when we were speaking. Because you'd be amazed that I would even use English words and the interpretation my husband will give to it would be different. So that's it. So effective communication and ability to resolve conflict quickly. When you are in an interethnic marriage, you need to understand that conflict is normal. It's not there because your partner is a bad person. It's just because you are different people who are coming from different tracks. So conflict resolution. And then, like I said, because we knew where we were going right from the beginning, because we had decided what our destination was going to be, the same way we decided that we wanted an Igbo family, that's how we also had to decide how did we want to relate with our families on both sides. That's how we also said to ourselves, by the time our child is 30 years old, what kind of a child do we want them to be? That's the same way we also thought to ourselves that by the time we've been married for 40 years, I remember you read in my bio that I had first-class honors. The first thing my husband said to me is that, it's not possible that God gave you this smart brain and wanted you to be at home. We sat down and realized that it's going to affect both of us and he would need to make some sacrifices. And we agreed, and things like that. So essentially for me, that would be to just understand that in an inter-ethnic relationship, inclusivity is very critical. Neither the husband, even if you're in a culture where the husband takes on the identity of a woman, a person of a man, sorry, a wife takes on the identity of a husband. A woman who was not born into that culture and who has no history, who has no heritage, cannot overnight become somebody who is a part of that
culture. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mommy Mo. So many questions were just coming up in my head as we were talking. But you know me, I like gist. And you mentioned something, you talked about what happened when you had your first child. If you hadn't talked about it, I wouldn't have mentioned it. So what happened, Mommy Mo? How were you able to navigate? Because I know there are people on that table and there will be people on that table. How were you able to navigate that?
Okay, then. I think I must also say that many things were behind it. Number one, it helped for me to remember that Nigeria had been through the Civil War. And because Nigeria had been through the Civil War, it meant that if my husband's family were scared about having me in their family, it wasn't so much about me. The thing is that what was their experience of Yoruba people when Nigeria went through the war? What was the experience of Yoruba people in different, and that really was what was it. In my own family, I've said we live like English people. My own family also had been exposed a lot. So my mother's parents lived in the north and literally became part of the community. My father's mother was not a Yoruba person. So we also had that. So it meant that my parents were a little bit more open. So when it was time for me when I was going to have this baby, people kept asking, so where is the naming ceremony going to take place? Where is the naming ceremony going to take place? So my father said, tell them it's my house. And it's interesting. All this, it is our culture, people. Not one of them ever thought, why is the naming ceremony taking place in her father's house? Not one person said, why are you having the naming ceremony in your father's house? Everybody just received that information. And on the seventh day, they all went to my parents' place. And my father, on his own side, said they should cook and send food to me and gave me clear instructions and said, anybody who misses the way and comes to your own house, just serve them food. You don't even need to call your husband from the room. Because if it is not his own culture and practice, we don't have to impose it on him. So people came to my house and I just said, here is the name of the child, here is rice, here is drink, where is baby? They saw the baby. And so nobody knew unless I told them that this was a deliberate arrangement. So of course, it made my husband happy because he wasn't forced to do a naming ceremony, which he didn't want to do. It made my relatives happy because they were able to celebrate the birth of the first grandchild in the way that they wanted to do it.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. I'm sure there is one person or two persons on the call that will be able to run with what you have said and adjust it in such a way that will fit, their own reality. Thank you so much, ma'am. Okay, so I think you've mentioned it, but I'll just ask again. How can African families balance traditional cultural values with modern societal expectation to create a lasting legacy?
That's a really great question, and I'm glad that you are asking it. I think that for many of us, we equate cultural practices with cultural identity. So, for example, I'm a Yoruba person. So most Yoruba people feel that if a young person stretches out their hand to shake an adult, the person is disrespectful. For me, that's a classic case of equating cultural practice with cultural identity. That Yoruba people feel that if you are a younger person you should not look an older person in the eye is a cultural practice. So when Africans are trying to, balance the cultural values, I think the first thing we all need to understand is you need to adapt without compromising your core values. So for me, for example, I don't feel any way. In fact, somebody wrote a Facebook post about me today, just illustrating this kind of a thing. I don't feel that the young person is deliberately disrespecting me simply because they do not practice respect in the way that I do. Because there are as many ways of demonstrating respect. I mean, something that created trouble for me when me and my husband got married is that in my home that I grew up in, the person boiling the chicken is the person who eats the gizzard. And so you eat it, you say, okay, the chicken is cooked, and nobody ever frowned. And then I married into a culture where eating gizzard is a matter of respect. If you cooked chicken as a woman and you ate it, and your father-in-law or an older male was in the family, you have committed sacrilege.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So they could look at me and say, this our wife is very disrespectful. Can you imagine her father-in-law was here, she ate the gizzard? Would I, as a Yoruba person who was coming, know that is a sign of respect? I wouldn't know. So equating cultural practices, to the values of your culture is not the right way to do. So you have to learn to first of all, examine your culture and say, these things we do, what do they represent? That's the thing. Now, if you're able to do that, then you become flexible in your application of it. Then read widely. You see, I'm a marriage educator. And one of the things I've had to tell many people is that, see, all those things we assume are problems of marriages in Nigeria, you will be amazed that Americans are experiencing the problem. Asians are experiencing the problem in exactly the same way as we are experiencing it. So read widely and expose yourself. That way you are able to recognize what is cultural practice and what is cultural value. And so you are able to be flexible, without, and then one thing then that you also want to do with your young people is, instead of saying, this is the way we have always done it, it's always interesting to say, have you ever wondered why we do things that way?
Please.
And so the question, and as the question, you're going to have, when my daughter was marrying, she asked us, her parents, and said, look, in Lagos, where we've lived all our life, you have friends who are close to us, who know me from my childhood, who have been involved in my upbringing. Why are we not giving the bride price to them? Why are we giving it to my father's cousins who I know little about, and so on and so forth? And that was a good question. It was an opportunity to hold on to our cultural identity. And we had a conversation about it as a family. But it was also an eye-opener to me and my husband, and say, look, we too, have we done well? Did we integrate these children with their relatives in the village? Did we help them to understand it? And now we're doing things differently. So cultivating a sense of belonging and responsibility. When you help your children to understand, for me now as a person and my husband, when my mother died and all her grandchildren wrote tributes, even though my mother had never sat down with them to say, this is our family value, this is our family culture, all of them were using literally the same words in the tree when they were saying, this is what I would remember my grandmother for, which means that just by being around them and interacting with them, she had clearly communicated a sense of belonging, which they would never lose. And so in our home, generally, we are always saying, okay, what do you think Grandpapa would have said if he was in this situation? What do you think Grandmama would have said? What do you think Papa Kuku would have said, which is my husband's father? So Just know that your culture has core values. Have you identified what they are?
Mm.
Don't equate your cultural values to your cultural practices.
Okay. Thank you so much. So it's important to be able to differentiate between the two so we don't get it all mixed up and look at our children as if they are being disrespectful or they're just, trying to be naughty, if I'm allowed to use that word. Because I find out that nowadays you see younger children using their left hand, to hand over things to us. I um I could remember years before now, before I encountered FSC, I will frown my face and I'll be like, no, give it to me with your right hand. But now I've come to understand that nothing means anything except the meaning I put to it. So if they give me by the right hand, fine. If they use the left hand, fine. But I try to, especially with our children, I try to tell them it's fine with mom and dad, but be mindful when you're going out because you might meet people who are not, of the same understanding as you are. So just try and be mindful. And if they say, oh, no, that's the way, that's not the way we want it to be, just adjust and move on. Thank you
And
so much.
just before you go, Ayo, it's not a new problem.
Hmm.
You know, it's an opportunity to teach children to be culturally sensitive and
Sensitive,
to pay
absolutely.
attention to other people. When my grandma visited for the first time and she referred to my mother's younger sister as my mother, I promptly told her that she was not my mother. And my grandma was very perplexed because I insisted that my auntie was not my mother. It took my
Hmm.
mom explaining to her that in English language, a mother is different from an auntie. And later on, my mother also spoke to me and said, Mama was not altogether wrong. It is you who did not understand her context. So you
Hmm.
see, I make this point because rather than just assume that the younger people are wanting not to go with the culture, it's to understand that they are living in a world that is different from your own. And you are the
Absolutely.
one who needs to be the bridge
Hmm.
between the old world and the new world.
Thank you so much, Ma. So I'll go on to my next question. What role does intergenerational communication play in building a strong family legacy? And how can African families foster effective dialogue across generations, especially now that a lot of Africans now migrate outside of Africa?
Okay,
It's
then.
a long one.
It is indeed. I think the first thing that I'm going to say to people who are experiencing this is to remind them it's not a new problem. Oh. It's not a new problem. At the time that I was born, most people had lived all their lives in the village and then they came to Lagos and had no relatives. The situation they went through is the situation that the people who are now going abroad are going through. I think one of the ways that you would preserve your heritage is you and your partner, especially for couples who are listening to me. And if you have older children, involve them in the conversation as well. You've got to determine what kind of a family. So if you're in Canada, for example, do you want to build a Canadian African family? Do you want to build a totally African family? You've got to have this conversation and define it and then ask yourself, what will be involved in this kind of a thing? That's the first thing. And then you've got to realize that for the children that you're going to nurture in that place, I was having a conversation with my husband yesterday, and I was talking about some young children in our own family who are under 10. And I said, the parents need to recognize that they can never be Nigerian in the way that they are.
Hmm.
The reason is that they have no roots here, especially for parents who cannot afford to bring the children home like once in 2 years, to build ties with here. they would learn all that you're going to teach them about your culture, but their primary culture that they're immersed in is the one that is over there. Now, what can you do for them? One, you can do a lot of storytelling. Talk about your own culture, you know, encourage them to listen to it. If there are videos and things like that. My nephew, for example, has told me now that one of the projects he's going to do in the new school year is just to study the history of Nigerians, some select Nigerians that he has chosen. Now, those are the things that you can do with older children so that they actually have knowledge of your own, no matter what you tell them, you have links that they don't have. So the culture that you're trying to talk about is not firsthand for them. So storytelling, so that they can learn from the past. And FSC is very good at that, you know. What is the history of your own nation? Sadly, because of the challenges that we're having now, we tend to talk about the problems of our nation a lot. When I'm talking, for example, to people about Nigeria, I tell them, I say, see, as terrible as Nigeria is the only place where if I shout in my yard now, my neighbor will come. If I'm going out, I can say, please, I'm going out. Children are there. Look at it. And, I'll be saying, so talk about the things also that are, that are good about our culture. So, and then create cultural archives. We didn't know that before, but when you write stories, when you journal, right now, when I'm doing my journal entries, on some mornings, I copy it and I send it to my children, even though they're all grown. Why? Because I want them to know things that are going on in my mind and I'm doing it. Now, the next thing is that we have to, foster mutual respect. Our culture is very big on the older people are the wiser people. They are the ones who know everything. And once upon a time, it was true. In today's world, it is not true. It is, let us just be honest with ourselves. It is not true. Your 10-year-old knows things that you are totally ignorant about. It's not this thing. So we need to accept that. And then we ask ourselves, how do we, foster mutual respect? I remember my father, I told him he was a very intentional man. One of the things he would say is that this thing you say you want to do question. I don't know anything about it too. Go and find out how they're doing it and then come back and tell me. When I now come back and say, they said this is how we should do, that's when he will now bring his wisdom and be helping me to see why we cannot do such a thing. But the thing is that I'm sure most of the things that I had in mind to do, if he was to do, I'm an adult, he would just say, no, you cannot do it. And you know how children are, they will go and do it. I remember my father doing 2 sitting rooms in his home. Why? Because he says, I don't want you people to be standing by the roadside talking to your friends. So it meant that I actually was bringing boys home from the age of 12 or 13, which is not what a typical African adult will say. But my father's attitude was that better for the boy to be sitting in my room and for all of you to be sitting, let me know what is going on and seeing the people than for you to be hiding under the tree. So those are some of the things that you have to foster mutual respect and then use your shared values. I think we tend to, again, it's similar to separating your values from your practices. We interpret a lot of the activities of our young people just based on that activities alone. We forget that this is a child that we have been nurturing and helping to, understand the values of the family. So instead of saying, why did you do such a thing? How can you do it? Why not say, okay, sit down with me based on our values. This thing that you have done or want to do, how does it fit with our own values? Yes. Why? Because remember that you don't have uncle, auntie, all kinds of things that people can go, your children can go and talk to. You are just there with them. You need to relate with them in a way that when they are pushed to the wall, you are the first person that comes to mind. And then the last thing I will share, I actually learned it from John C. Maxwell. Many people do not know that he wrote a book on parenting, Breakthrough Parenting. That's the title of the book. And one of the things he advised is that you've got to make friends with your children in mind. So you make friends who you are going to parent
together,
your children together with. In Africa, we're very much focused on our family of origin. We expect them to be our immediate support, and that is good. But what if your family of origin does not have the capacity to be the kind of support that you need for nurturing your children? That's the first question. Many people have gone through family hurts, and so they have put their family of origin, at arm's length. Yes. Do you know that you can actually create what we call a family of choice? A family that you choose. I, for example, now am mother to a number of women, and by reason of that, grandparents to their children. But what people do not understand that it's not even just that. I recruited my husband. So if you ask me to be your adopted mom, I have to discuss with my entire family and say, it's not just me. So over time, you find that people who I do this relationship with become siblings to my children. It means that their children are also having. So you actually can consciously, in your location over there, look for people. Find Nigerians if you can. Find people from your ethnic group if you can. But even if you cannot do that, my daughter's bestest friend in North America is a white American. But she chose that family because when she visited with them, she saw them living like we live. So the grandmother would ask after her, and all of those kind of things. And so that's what you can create, a family of choice. And those are some of the things that I would say. If you are there, if your parents are still alive, do video calls, do WhatsApp calls, encourage your children. I think it's important for me to say this. It's not for the communication. So you are your parents' child. Your child is your parents' grandchild. You now need to help your child to develop a relationship with their grandparents that is independent of you.
Of us.
So when my parents were alive, if my children are dating somebody, my parents actually knew before me.
Oh, wow.
Yes, because my father will ask and they would talk. So they were my children, but they also had independent relationships with their grandparents, with their uncles, with their aunties, even people who are our friends. For those of them who were very close to us, as my children grew older, I encouraged them to form independent relationships with those adults.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ma, for this. As we were talking, you touched on values, and that just reminded me of the time when we crafted our vision, our mission, and our values. And I remember that it reduced my noise making to the barest minimum in the house. Because when our children are doing things outside of the values, I'll just point, because we have it hung on the wall, and I'll just point. Is that how someone who has love does? Is that how someone with integrity does? Is that excellent? So by just saying that, everybody behaves. So it's very, very important for all of us, to have our values. So I'm using this opportunity to speak to all of us on the call. You may have your individual value, but if you belong to a family, what are the values that bind everybody together? What are those things, that you all run with? And when they say, oh, this is someone from the Agbola family, they know because of the way the person is living his or her life. Okay, so we go on to the next question, and I'm very, very interested in this because I know that a lot of African families are defaulting in this area. And I know that you wrote an ebook, regarding this particular this particular question. And it says, how can African families prioritize financial literacy and wealth transfer to secure their legacy for future generations? So this has to do with money, 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 money. Give me up some money, 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 money.
Okay, that's a really great question, and I'm glad that we are addressing it. I think the first thing that we all need to understand is that we all, our origin is in what I call subsistence culture. What I mean by subsistence culture is generally in our culture, the way that many of us have been nurtured is just to think of today and maybe tomorrow. Why? Because there wasn't always enough. So when you don't have enough and you are trying to stretch it, you thinking about tomorrow is a luxury that you cannot afford. So you want to ask yourself many questions and say, the way you do. I knew a lady, for example, who even when her children was in the university, would go shopping when they're going to go back to school for them. And when I asked her, why do you do that? She said, the money is not enough. When she goes to the market, she makes it stretch further, which sounds very reasonable. But what she did not know is that by doing that, she was denying the children an opportunity to learn how to manage money. And that thinking comes from a subsistence culture. So I think the first question is, these parents who are thinking of this, they themselves, are they financially literate? And I have some slightly different perspective. You know, most people earn money, multiple streams of income, everything. Those ones are good. I know that TPF has taught us many things about that one. However, the very first step is the ability to sit down and define what I call your survival needs. So as a couple, have you ever sat down to say, what's our definition of basic survival? For someone staying in a one-room apartment may be basic survival. For another person, living in a 3-bedroom apartment may be basic survival. For somebody, basic survival may mean eat 2 meals a day. For another person, it may mean eat 3 meals a day, have snacks. But you need to define that.
Works for you.
And when you define that, and you can do it also with your children if they are older. Why? Unless you understand what you need money for, you can't think wisely about it. So if you don't define what your basic survival needs, I remember that when our children wanted to go to secondary school, education is very important to me. In fact, in my own family of origin, sacrifice was made to make sure that you get education. So the school I chose, for me, it was nothing must be spared. And then my husband said, we cannot afford it. And I looked at him and said, what do you mean we cannot afford it? Education, you must, whatever it takes is what you will give it. And then he said, no, we cannot afford it. We can afford the school fees, but we cannot afford the lifestyle of the school.
Comes with the school.
That you're saying we should go. Now, what will be the impact on our children if they're going to a school? And then he said, what is the purpose of education? The second time we had to think about it also was when I was thinking children should go abroad. And we had to sit down and do an assessment and say, the way we nurtured our children, have we prepared them to live alone away from us? And we realized that we didn't do that. So you need to know what your basic survival needs are and agree it as a couple. Then you need to educate yourself and say, what is required? So if you are in Nigeria now, you will know that if your basic survival need was a 3-bedroom apartment in January of 2023, it is still a 3-bedroom apartment today, but the amount of money you need is a lot more. So that's the reason why it's important to define that basic, because once you know it, then the next question is, how much do I need in order to do that? The third question then that you want to ask yourself is, I am working now, and I say the money is not enough. what will happen when I get to a situation where I cannot earn money? And that's where you find your why. For why, even if you're earning only 10 naira, out of that 10 naira, you have to put something aside. And richest man in Babylon told us that if 10 gold coins are not enough to meet your needs, removing one from it is not going to make you suffer. So constantly remove that one. So that, for me, is what will be financial education. And we do need to begin to teach the children from when they're very young. When my children was small, before they went to secondary school, at the end of the month, when I collect my pay and I go to Oyibo and I shop, when I come back home, I show them, I say, Mommy collected salary today and see what she has bought. Because Mommy collects salary only once in a month, everything that we have bought here now needs to last for a month. And that comes also from me growing up in a place where when it's time to go to school, my father would ask us to make a list of all that we want to take to school, and we will write everything. Then we will sit around the dining table and everybody will defend what they're asking. And he will listen to us. And at the end, he will say, but you know, the salary I was getting last term is still the salary I'm getting this term. So what do you think we should do? Because if there is no increase in, and then we will go and say, but the price of something has gone up. But the happy conclusion we always reach is that we will collect whatever he gave us. Because we knew that that was what he had. And that, for me, is the beginning of educating your children about finances. Of course, we can then go on to all the other things that, you know, we have generally been told. But for this particular question, I want to recommend a certain book, Wealth of Wisdom. Top 50 questions that wealthy families ask. Wealth of Wisdom. The top 50 questions that wealthy families ask by Tom McCullough and Keith Whitaker. You see, building family wealth that will last for generations is not a money issue. It's not a mindset issue alone as well. It's a cultural issue. So, for example, now, when you look at our culture, when people are deciding to do a wedding and the bride decides to wear 5 outfits, even for families who can afford it, the question to ask is, who are you wearing it for? When you begin to understand the kind of questions that you should ask, building family wealth cannot happen if you have not done the work of building your family. And this book that I talked about, it was written by 2 people whose life work is to help wealthy people manage their wealth. And over time, they found out that the challenges that wealthy people had was not the money. The challenges that they had is what kind of families had they built. So how you relate with your children about money, how you get them to relate together, how you make financial decisions, a lot of other things. This book, Sha, is not a book that you're just going to read immediately, because each question is answered like a treatise. So I said, to answer this question, let me just recommend that. And then, of course, you can buy my own small ebook, 30 Reasons Why Couples Quarrel About Money. And what that will just show you is that half of the money quarrels that couples have is really because they're coming from different places. Nothing more.
Wow, thank you so much, Ma. Again, so many things were going through my mind. Some few days ago, our daughter, our second child, came in. We were having challenge with the Wi-Fi. And she was like, Mom, please, can you send me data? And I said, no, because she's interning somewhere. And I said, you'll be paid by the end of the month. So what's it? She said, Mommy, please. Then after that, she said, Mommy, I don't know how you people do it. at which things are expensive, because like you do, I also do the same. So when we go shopping, I call them, this is the amount I bought this, this is the amount I bought this, this is the amount I bought this. And I want us to stretch it, you know, like this, especially when it comes to things like plantain or bread, you know. I tell them they have to ensure that we take plantain.
Let me
Because I
share
know if I don't, okay, ma.
Let me share something with you. My husband is a financially disciplined person. And you know where he came from? When he went to meet his dad in the UK, and his dad got him a job, when he got his first pay, you know what his dad said to him? He said, well, I'm glad that you are having this pay now. So what are the needs that you are going to meet from this salary? And my husband said he stated it, and his dad said, okay, so that's how much you're going to be spending. The rest will be going to the bank. Why? A person doesn't spend all his money at once. Imagine, I mean, you say that your daughter is interning now and she's going to get an income. She's already said, I don't know how you people did it. That's a signal to you that whatever you thought you have taught her, she hasn't still learned it yet. And so you say, okay, you're going to get this income. Have you thought, so when you go to work, how much you spend? When you eat, if you have to eat, essentially, what did I say? What are your basic survival needs that you are going to be meeting from this? And that's the way to begin to teach her, because then when she collects this thing now, because she can get data from you and because she can take food from home and all of those kind of things, she has plans for her money that she's going to collect. But what if she moves away from you now? She has to live on whatever she's earning.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ma. And maybe just to chip this in as well, for those of us who have children, it's also good to teach them, like Mommy Mo said, and just add into that, teach them from when they are young by living out that lifestyle. You know, part of the things that we do, and we still, okay, up until you are 18, is every month something goes into your bank account. So when in Yoruba tribe, we do naming ceremony and you're given money. So the money we are given is not for us, it's for the children. And we use that to open an account for them. And every month till they are 18, something goes into that account. And when they are 18, we hand it over to them and we expect them to continue the culture, of adding into that, and even now invest, maybe new mothers or those who already have children. This is something you can begin to do to add, so that we're teaching them to create wealth, right from their childhood. Really, Tonya happens to be someone who is very, 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 when it comes to her money, she watches over her money.
Let me also share something for the parents of young children. When my oldest was about 8 or 9, we decided to start giving them pocket money. And when we started giving them that pocket money, so we said, when it's somebody's birthday, because there was a store in our estate, when it's somebody's birthday, mommy is no longer going to help you to buy birthday cards. If you people want snacks, you can go get it yourself, and everything. The first outcome of giving them that pocket money and saying that, people who I will go to the store with and will not be able to agree on one birthday card because I was the person paying for it, started cooperating to buy a birthday card, started cooperating to buy biscuits so that they would then open it and share it. When I was paying for it, when we would go to the store, they would tell me why somebody likes chocolate and I don't like chocolate biscuits. I was so giving them pocket money and allowing them to become people who make their financial decisions, even from a young age, is a way of helping them as well.
Thank you so much, Ma. I still have a teenager, so I think I will be able to to incorporate that in our systems already. Okay, so you mentioned storytelling the other time. Would like to find out what ways we can leverage storytelling and oral traditions to preserve our history, values, and cultural heritage.
We can learn, we can look back and learn. Many stories that we were told about tortoise were simply, they were not tortoise stories at all. They were more stories to teach us values. And even you can't use that anymore, but generally you can think of stories. So if you want your child to understand something, instead of saying this is it, you can actually decide to do a story format. You can tell your own story and then make it into a story format. You can tell stories about your parents. You can tell stories about a lot of things. But what is important is that you have what I call regular storytelling sessions. So the storytelling is the way they used to do tales by moonlight. You know, if you look back at village life, this is what happened. Usually children went with their parents to the farm and everybody is working. And then when the sun is up high at noonday, they will go into the shade and sit down. Those were times when conversations were had between parents and children. Then in the evening, when they come back, they sit in front of the hut. There was nothing else to do, or at least by our own standards. But the only thing left for them to do is to actually have real conversations with one another. Now, I know that many of us go to work, and so a daily practice may not be, but you do need to have regular storytelling sessions. That's the first thing. And for those of you whose children are far away, you can have, you know, online stories. My family actually has sometimes Zoom sessions that has no agenda. We just want to goof around. Because if we were together in the same location, that's what we will do. But since we are not together in the same location, we're utilizing WhatsApp. Every morning, I just wake up and go and say good morning. You know, not that I want to say anything, but just the same way I would say good morning. If they were at home, I would say, sometimes in the night, I'll say, I'm going to bed, good night. Things like that. And immediately something happens to me, I will put it in it, and they will read the room and say, this is something we ought to call mommy about. But, you know, utilize technology and multimedia. So sometimes I would say, it's a long time since we had our voices, so everybody do a voice note today. Sometimes I'll say, it's a long time since we saw one another's faces. But storytelling, stories about what is happening. I remember when all of the things that is happening in Nigeria was happening, and my children said, this country has done everything. And then I said, no, actually, in 1982, this happened as well. And that was the time rice went up to 50 naira a bag. And, you know, all of us were shouting, you know, and we shared the experiences at that time of how rice was so scarce and people had to be buying rice from outside the country to send to their parents, you know, and things like that. What was I doing then? We just were wanting them to understand that, see, problems are part of life. These ones are looking very huge now, but the only reason they're looking huge is because you are experiencing it. It has happened before. It has happened in my father's time. It probably will still happen in the future. So generally, whenever issues come up or they're talking about things, we share stories. That is a wonderful way to, for me, you know, that Africans can use, especially for the people who are living in the diaspora. It's very important that you craft stories. News media does not help you to paint your heritage well. We are not saying that all those problems are not there. As a grown woman, if these things that we're saying, I had to remind my American friends that I agree, things are very difficult for many people. But in this country, there are also still people who are doing well.
Everywhere.
So you need to become this person who is going to tell your own stories, not to paint a rosy picture for your children, but use it as an opportunity for them to see life.
Okay.
And if you like, I mean, you can also, family activities can be, okay, let some people act plays. The way my children gave me feedback, really vivid feedback, is that they weren't even planning to give me feedback. They just said they had prepared a drama. And as they were doing this drama, oh my
You
God,
see yourself.
I was seeing myself. So after that, we sat down and we talked about it, you know, so we can use a lot of ways. Yeah, you can ask them to draw pictures, you know, and things like that, that would then be the source of conversations. But you know that the reason you are doing these activities is that you are bypassing their conscious resistance to sow seeds in their minds that nobody can take away.
Absolutely. You know, I was laughing as you were talking because something happened to me yesterday. I went out and on my way back in, okay, we got some things, pepper, tomatoes, and all. So I did some before I left. So I left the Scotch bonnet for the children, Tosin, Toyin, and Tammy. So when I got back, they were, you know, dealing with it with their gloves and everything. And as I came in, they said, hey, mommy, we have something for you. It was Tosin, her first child. He said, mommy, you are used to throwing things that is not your own away. You think we don't need it. This is the second time. You took this, you took, and you know, I was laughing. And the other two said, mommy, this is not laughing matter. It is true. And I told him, I said, I won't do it again. I said, mommy, you said you won't do it the other time. Now you've thrown away my Crocs. You know, so it's amazing the way our children are free nowadays to give us our feedback, and we are also opening up to take whatever they have to share with us. So yeah, storytelling, oral traditions, passing down our stories, sharing with them who their grandparents were, their great grandparents, and things like that can really, really help in ensuring that the heritage and the legacy is sustained. I have two questions more, and I will just share that quickly. How can African parents model values such as resilience, community living, collective responsibility to their children, ensuring this value endure as part of their family legacy?
Leave it out.
Yeah.
That's a summary of it. Leave it out. If your children see you being resilient, you know, another thing in Africa culture is that authority people feel that it's a sign of weakness.
Weakness.
To let the people who are under their authority know that they don't have everything together. If as parents, the impression you give your children is that you are always on top of situation, one of the things that you are doing is that you're setting a high bar for them. They would keep wanting to be like you. The question is, do you intentionally teach them how you got to be that way? So and I'm going to use a personal illustration now. So when my daughter was going to apply for her master's program, apparently she was so overwhelmed, she was getting into a panic attack. Of course, she was already in her 20s. So me, I was like, how can you be this thing? After some time, I asked myself, I said to her, but you get overwhelmed sometimes too. When you get overwhelmed, what do? You break the tasks into bits. So I said, okay. So instead of saying break the task into bits, I said, okay, so how many schools do you want to apply to? She told me the number. Let us write down their names. What are the deadlines for submission? So I then said, okay, so let us take the one that the deadline is close. Make a plan for doing it. And when she submitted that one, I applauded her. I said, what is the next one? What is the next one? And over a period of a couple of months, she did all of those things. I then said, do you see what we did? So because she had already gone through it, it was easier for her to understand that that is the way to go. I now went and opened my journal and showed her numerous times when I'll be overwhelmed and I will pray and I will say, I don't even know how I'm going to handle it. So essentially, she was saying that even this, my mother, who I think is a superwoman,
she has a
also
downtime.
goes through this thing. So when I then said to her, it's a human thing. The only thing is that I cannot take responsibility for you.
For your life.
You are the only one who has to take responsibility for yourself. So share your personal stories. Work with your children in practical ways. There's something that I learned a long time ago. No-brainer gap. What is a no-brainer gap? So if I want to teach Ayodeji something today, which I have been doing for years, I want to teach her, I will just say, this is how you should do it. When I'm telling her, because it's a long time ago that I learned it, I will not remember the early days when I was struggling with it. That early days that we omit is called the no-brainer gap. Because you are now proficient in it, you are just thinking, anybody with a brain should be able to understand this. But the thing is, the person who is just starting does not have that basic knowledge. So anytime you want to teach your children something, you need to remember that there is something called the no-brainer gap. And you have to go back to when you actually learned it yourself and look at all of the things that are that would constitute a no-brainer gap. So you have to live it. And in living it, it means that you share sometimes when you're going through things with your children and to say, I'm trying to figure these things out and it's really tough for me, so that when it is their own turn, you would now be able to say, you remember when mommy was going through this, she explained that she too was having difficulty. That would be essentially it. And then as a family, so when you have your family meetings, I encourage people to do what we call State of the Union report, which is to say, this is what is going on in my life, or these are the issues that I'm facing. And the best way for a parent to help children to do it is to be so if you're going to have such State of the Union report, it had better be the father or mother who first did their own State of the Union report. Another way by which you can also get such things done is when you have your family meetings, you can do icebreakers. When you put icebreakers, put questions that would make the person sit on their toe. And if you are the person who gets to choose that question, just face it. I remember when we did an icebreaker, and we had questions of, would you tell your parents if you have a boyfriend or something like that? And it was me who picks that question.
Oh, wow.
And so I had to say to my children, I had to tell them that I actually did an escapade. I went to Kano to see my boyfriend without telling my parents. And then my sister also then shared her own story of how she actually bought tickets to begin to go to Poland to visit her boyfriend who was there. We needed to be that honest. And you could see, they say, you mean you people did such things? We said yes. And that's the reason why when you want to do the things you want to do, we actually know, because it is something that we have done before. But essentially on that day, because we did that, they knew that we were fallible people. They knew that we could do the things. I mean, we had done the things that they did, but they also now got insight into how it looks as if everything they want to do, we catch them. It was something that we had done before, and it opened up the room and made them also to talk about things that they were going through.
What you just said now reminded me of a proverb in Yoruba. I'll say it in Yoruba, then I'll translate in English. It says, Agbawabura dewi obasheori. That is, the elderly one or the older one come and swear if you were never, or you were never once a child. So you are able to see where they are going even before they get there, and you're able to catch them. I know, I see you, what you're trying to do, Thank you so much. You mentioned the fact that we need to have family meetings. And this is really, 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 really important so that per time we know where everyone is. And while you were talking, it reminded me of a particular experience I had when I was in Canada with Tamilore. It was a bit of a very challenging season. And Tammy happens to be a very sensitive child. So that particular day, she came to me and she said, Mommy, are you okay? And immediately I said, yes, I'm okay. But as I said that, I said, no, Tammy, Mommy is not okay. I'm trying to sort out a few things at the moment, and I believe I'm going to be okay. And what happened to me at that point in time was if I maintain the fact that I was okay when I wasn't okay, I'm making her doubt her intuition because she sensed something. She came to me and I told her that whatever she sensed was wrong. So that will make her to doubt herself. That will make her in the future, when she senses things, to just overlook and feel maybe it is just something that I'm thinking, you know. So I caught myself at that point. I said, no, Mommy is not okay. But by the time Mommy is able to think through this thing, she will be okay. So we need to be able to leave it out, like you said. We need to be able to let them see us, because a lot of parents, their children can't see them. They have a facade. You're making them not get through to you. And when they now grow up and they are going through what you have gone through, it makes them feel as if they are not doing well because they never heard mommy or daddy say, this is it. I can remember another time we were having a family meeting and we just had this conversation with the children that you children may not understand. And our son, after some time, said, Mommy, we understand because we see, because you are not hiding anything from us. So we see, we know. So it's very important that we let them see us so that when they are also growing and they are facing life challenges, because it will come, they are able to handle it well and pass the same thing to their own children or even the people they relate with. And this brings me to my last and very last question. And I have here, what strategies can African families employ to navigate cultural identity, racial and social justice issues, and other external factors that impact our legacy while maintaining unity and cohesion? Thank you, ma'am.
Again,
That's another mouthful.
yes, again, I would like all of us to remember where we're coming from. We're coming from a culture that people in authority and older people are the people who deal with problems, and they are meant to be protecting the young ones. In today's world, that will not work. It worked in the past because in the village, if anything happens, it's very easy to put a protective wall around the children and they were not exposed. In today's world, right under your very nose, if you choose not to discuss what is happening in America in your home, it does not mean that your child does not know it, because your child is discussing it with other people. And so it means that you cannot live in your silo. For example, now, I have only one daughter who has chosen to live abroad. But in the last 2 months, I've read 3 books, or rather listened to 3 books that is talking about Black history and racial things and so on and so forth. Why? Because whether I'm interested in it or not, by reason of the one child who is living there, who may bring up children there, all of those things are going to affect them. I can either be knowledgeable or ignorant.
Yeah.
If I choose to be knowledgeable, I can bring the conversation to our family meetings and we can talk about it. During the last elections, my family had to sit down and have a conversation about the ethnic divide that is in our nation. And we have to begin to understand that, okay, even though we are a family that is not ethnically divided, we're having to face things that are outside. I've said to myself, I've had to discuss the homosexual issues with my children. I mean, it's a conversation I would rather not have. But if we don't talk about it in our family, we will not come to a common agreement. And common agreement doesn't mean that everybody believes the same thing. I mean, when my daughter moved to a new location and her boss is somebody who is in a homosexual relationship and he was looking after her very much, I cannot say he's a bad man and refuse and say don't do anything. She had to go into the office every day to work with him. So the thing to do is to embrace open and inclusive dialogue. I have a personal mantra: relationship is the bridge that you walk on to influence people. And so if you have open and inclusive dialogue with your children and family members, then these things will come up. You listen to them, they listen to you, you listen to them. You may have to have many conversations and not come to agreement, but that's okay. What most of us don't realize is that that process of conversing together is shaping minds. Why? It's opening you up to ideas that you didn't think about before. I remember when my daughter said to me that, do I know the reason why many young ladies wear trousers? Say, if you have to be riding Okada, it is there to wear trousers. Frankly, until she said that, that never occurred to me. And so I became less judgmental about young ladies who were wearing trousers, because obviously they had a reason which is very valid, but which I was not aware. So then cultivate a strong sense of cultural identity. You know, many years ago, something made the rounds that when you recruit a teller, somebody who is going to be paying cash on the counter in the bank in the US, they don't go showing them the fake dollar notes. They actually show them the real dollar notes and get them to handle it for so long that when they actually pick up a fake note, they will know that it is fake. Yes. Now, what you want to do is be somebody who creates a strong sense of cultural identity for your children. And if you remember what I said in the beginning, cultural values is not necessarily cultural practice. So we're saying help your children to understand the essence of who they are. Cultural values is also not ethnic values, because in today's world, you as a family need to know what your family values are, what your family vision is, and what your family mission is. When you help your children to so become that, one of the interesting conversations that myself and my son are always having is saying, Mommy, you people didn't bring us up to live in Nigeria. I said, what do you say? All the things that people do that, you know, when they ask them to cut corners, they find it difficult to cut corners and it costs them something. I said, yes, your grandfathers had to pay that price. It is not a new thing. Your own children are eventually going to have to pay. So help cultivate a strong sense of cultural identity for your family. Then also engage in community and advocacy efforts. So I do the Right Fit Marriage Academy now. I constantly talk with my children that, look, it's not because I want couples to be happy in their marriage. Yes, they are happy, but it's because I know that the family is the fundamental unit in the community, and that patterns are continually repeated if there is not intervention in one family. So when they complain that marriages are this and so on and so forth, I said, you have an option. You can be part of the problem or you can be part of the solution. People don't know, so they are not doing well. You know, let us help them to know better. And so you can support local initiatives. You know, there are different initiatives that are going on now. Encourage your children. You know, there is conversation that is going on everywhere. If you choose to focus on the fear-based conversations, I'm currently reading a lot of literature about the things in the Middle East, they call it Israel and Palestine and everything. Many of us are reading the news reports and we are taking positions. But the thing is that there is a lot of history on both sides that we need to catch up on. And once you begin to read up on those histories, it becomes harder for you to just read the news report and take a position, and then you and your family, so then, in different efforts to resolve issues, be part of the people. And I like that House of Saviors, we say we are solution providers. Be part of the people who are looking for what is wrong, not who is wrong. And what can we do to resolve issues, not who should we be blaming for creating the issues.
Okay. Thank you so much. So we shouldn't pass blames. We should become the solution that we are actually looking out for in our world. It's been a very, very intellectually stimulating session with you, Ma. Thank you so much for availing us your time, your knowledge, your wisdom, and sharing your life with us. We really, really do appreciate you. And I want us to go on the chat and just appreciate Mommy Mo. Let's appreciate Mommy Mo in the house with the claps, with the... Yes, let's just appreciate Mommy. And if you want to unmute, if it's possible for you to unmute, just unmute yourself and just say, thank you, Mommy Mo, because this has been a very, very beautiful, yes, time out for us. Thank you, Ma, and thank you, everyone, for staying on. We appreciate you. We believe you've been able to take one or two things away from our session today. Yes. And we continue next week by God's grace. I hand over to Oluwaseun Oshikoya. God bless.
Yes. Thank you, Ayo. That was a beautiful session. Thank you, Mommy Mo, my own Mommy Mo. Thank you so much. One major thing that I'm taking away, what are we leaving out? Because this is about legacy from one generation to another. What exactly are we leaving out? How intentional are we? Because these children, they are like a sponge. They are soaking up everything, and they would display and do exactly what it is that we are doing. So what are we leaving out? What are we